All right, guys, this is going to be a little bit different, I think, than most football manager advice videos you may have seen or you may have heard. Most people will tell you that one of the keys to success in football manager is to focus on getting young players. There's a whole philosophy out there called youth to gold, where you do nothing but get the best young players at every position you possibly can, and you never sign anybody who's over 19 years old and stuff like that. I've played that way before, and you can have some success doing so, but I'm going to tell you here that that's not the only way to play. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a quick look over here at the game, and I'll show you one of the things that I've learned. You can see this right here from the start, right? Wen Hao, who we just saw earlier this morning, who scored a hat trick and who did very well, is 33 years old and is an older player. And there are times, it depends on the league that you're in and depends on the player, but there are times you can find players like this who are really, really good, who have good experience and who can come in and who can create a lot for your team and who can be very, very helpful in the right setup. So there are a couple of things you need to think about. You need to think, first of all, about what your setup is like, especially if you're talking about like a striker, you're talking about like a strong defender in an important position and stuff like that. You want to make sure that you have the sort of setup that will lead you to success, right? So, I mean, when we're talking about a guy like Wen Hao, who's 33 years old, who's probably going to be a little bit slower than most, we want to make sure that we actually do have an offensive setup here that's going to create a lot of chances for him so that he's not trying to do a whole bunch of work creating chances himself. In theory, we probably should be able to turn him into a poacher up here. We're not going to do that. But in theory, for a striker 33, 34, 35 years old who might not be like a world-class player, that's the sort of thing that you probably want to be looking at, right? Other thing I'm going to tell you about this is that when you're looking at older players, you want to look and make sure that you've got a player who doesn't have like some huge red flag. So we'll look here at Chen Hao Wei, who's also 33, who's going to retire at the end of the season. I mean, I don't even know if I'm going to play him that much or not. Again, 68 caps. You see these guys who have a lot of international experience that can be very, very helpful. Now, the coaches will tell me he's surplus to requirements. Well, maybe. What I'm looking for here, though, is to make sure that there's nothing really, really upsetting that's going on, right? I want to make sure that he doesn't have that big inconsistent flag up here. I want to make sure that he doesn't have one of those things saying he dislikes big matches. Also, you want to worry about injuries, right? Because at this point in time, see, he hasn't been injured at all for anybody, but at this point in time, a big injury to a player like this, especially if you're reliant on him, could really, really screw things up for you. So you want to be careful with that. I would recommend having a mix of younger players, as you can see that we have here. Guys like Ocher Wei and Shilla, Bamba, some of these foreign players who we've brought on are younger, as well as some of these older guys who can be sort of squad leaders and who can help you out when you really need them. Even a guy like Li Mao, who normally I probably wouldn't hire because he's got that dislike of big matches. Now, this is orange, so it's not quite that severe, right? And we've seen him play well. Even a guy like this, though, can be very, very helpful in terms of like the balance of the squad, in terms of making sure that the other players are happy. We look here at our squad dynamics. You can see here we've got average cohesion. The atmosphere is good and is getting better. The cohesion is going to continue to improve as these players play more and more together. When you look at the hierarchy, though, this is almost like a thing of beauty, right? Cai Yuting remains our major team leader and is the captain. And we have a whole bunch of influential players who are mostly players who've played for a while and highly influential and influential players, and that gives us a more natural pyramid, which makes it a lot easier for the younger guys to fit in. If you're not doing it this way, if instead you're trying to do nothing but youth to gold, you'll find a pyramid that is nothing but a bunch of other players, which is going to hurt your team's dynamics overall. That can give you a major disadvantage, especially if it's the case that you have a lot of new players coming in who are not used to playing together, or if you end up with like, I don't know, a winter transfer or something like that, where you bring a whole bunch of new guys in trying to fix some problems. If you don't really have this type of hierarchy, that can really cause some issues. The other nice thing is that you'll see that players will naturally get along together and they'll start to form different social groups. Now, if you really want to, you can use some of these players as mentors for other players who might not have the best personalities and try to increase professionalism. Unfortunately, we don't have any players here who are like really highly professional, right? Most of these guys are going to be balanced. Cai Yuting's a little bit different because he's driven. Most of these guys are going to be, sort of mediocre, I would say, in terms of professionalism. But that's not a huge problem, right? You can still deal with that. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but I would say that personality is not quite as important as making sure that you avoid inconsistency and avoid the dislike of big matches. But one thing that you do need to keep in mind is that it can be very, very helpful for your team to have some of these older players around, even if they only play for a season or two, who can be influential in your squad and who can help things out. And of course, the nice thing is that, maybe they don't require as much money as you would think, right? I mean, Lee Mao, for example, we look at his contract details, he's asking for $240 per week, which, I mean, is quite a bit of money for Taiwan, but it's not a huge chunk of our finances, you can see. In fact, when you look at our, let's see if we can find this here, the salary commitment that we have, it's not really that bad for some of these players who are a little bit older. This is a little bit more like it. Some of these guys, if they were a couple years younger, would probably be asking for more money. And that's kind of where you want it to be, right? You want to just make sure that they're not going to have like some sort of insane or crazy wage demand. When you go to hire players like this, usually when they're like 33, 34, 35 or so, you can get them to sign on less money. They're just trying to play. They're trying to play out the string of their career. And maybe you can get a really good season from somebody who's otherwise not the sort of player that you would expect to be absolutely like amazing, or you might not expect them to come down to your level. So, when you see stuff on Reddit about, I don't know, like Ronaldo or someone like that hitting age like 37, and then you're like, oh yeah, we'll go ahead and sign him for this League Two side. I mean, if you do run into that sort of possibility, I would say go for it, absolutely, because you could use a good older player who can do some things to sort of help fill a position while you're waiting for a young guy to be able to take over. And maybe you can win a championship or two with a guy right before the very end of his career. It's not really such a bad idea or bad theory. Of course, now the other thing that we should mention here that you do need to know about Football Manager, at least in this year's version, is that Football Manager here in 2023 is different than it was in the past. So if you go back to FM 21 or FM, even to an extent FM 22, you'll usually see players who are like 28, 29 years old who all of a sudden like totally fall off of the side of the earth. They fall off a cliff, and their productivity ends up going down a very, very significant amount. That's not really the same anymore in FM 23. You see more players who will continue to play well into their early 30s. However, the Football Manager artificial intelligence may not fully understand this. And so as a result, you might find that there are some market inefficiencies that show up where you can get some really good players who can play specific roles, even players that your own scouts or your own coaches might not like that much, who can play well for you until the end of of their careers. It's definitely worth going after, right? The overall idea behind Youth to Gold, that you're going to build up your young players and you're going to make a really strong squad that competes into the future, and you'll always have guys to replace them if they're bought by larger clubs, that still applies, right? But it's nice sometimes to have some of these older, more experienced players who can come in to fit a certain role, especially if like your 18-year-old striker is just not quite to that level yet, right? Give him a little bit of time to cook down in the lower leagues, or put him out on loan or something like that. Have him play a match maybe every once in a while to fill in. You'll find that your experience might be a little bit better, and it might be a little bit easier for you to win now. Anyway, that's it from me. Remember those older players. You don't want to completely abandon them. I'll talk with you later. Bye.